The town of Black Hollow was small, the kind of place people drove through without giving a second glance. Surrounded by dense woods and cloaked in fog for much of the year, it held an eerie charm, especially around Halloween. The town's centerpiece was the old Black Hollow Cemetery, a sprawling, overgrown graveyard that stretched deep into the woods. It was a place of legends, whispers, and above all, fear. For decades, there had been rumors of a curse that hung over the cemetery. No one knew exactly when it started, but every Halloween, someone from the town disappeared, never to be seen again. People said the spirits of the damned roamed the cemetery on Halloween night, luring the living to their doom. The townsfolk of Black Hollow had long since learned to lock their doors and stay indoors once the sun set on October 31st. But that didn't stop the occasional curious soul from wandering too close to the cemetery's iron gates. This Halloween, that curious soul was Ethan. Ethan had recently moved to Black Hollow with his family, unfamiliar with the town's dark history. A restless 16-year-old, he found the town's small size and quiet streets stifling. Halloween had always been his favorite time of year, but here, there were no big parties, no trick-or-treaters. The townspeople seemed more anxious than excited, their usual decorations limited to a few half-hearted pumpkins and some cobwebs in the windows. Ethan's new friend, Tyler, was one of the few who shared his interest in the macabre. Tyler was a local, born and raised in Black Hollow, but he had always been fascinated by the stories of the cemetery and its curse. The legend says that if you walk into Black Hollow Cemetery on Halloween night and call out to the spirits, they'll answer, Tyler had told Ethan one afternoon at school. His eyes glinted with excitement. Most people are too scared to try it, though. My cousin went once a few years ago, he swears he heard voices. Ethan had laughed it off at first. Ghosts in the cemetery? Sounds like a horror movie cliché. But the idea stuck in his mind. Halloween night was approaching, and the thought of doing something truly terrifying appealed to him. After all, what harm could there be in visiting an old cemetery? Ghosts weren't real. Or so he thought. As Halloween night arrived, Ethan made up his mind. He would go to the cemetery, if only to prove to himself, and to Tyler, that the stories were just stories. They agreed to meet by the cemetery's gate at midnight, long after most of the town had settled into their homes, doors locked, curtains drawn. The night was colder than usual, a biting chill in the air that seeped through Ethan's jacket as he made his way through the foggy streets. The town was eerily silent, with not a single light on in the windows he passed. He pulled his hood up, his breath visible in the cold night air as he approached the cemetery's iron gates. Tyler was already there, standing beneath the dim glow of the single streetlight, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "You made it," Tyler said with a grin, though his voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. Ethan shrugged. "Told you I would. It's just an old cemetery. What's the worst that could happen?" Tyler hesitated before pushing open the creaking gate. "Let's find out." The cemetery was even more unnerving than Ethan had expected. The fog seemed thicker here, swirling between the tombstones like ghostly fingers. The path was narrow and overgrown, flanked by crumbling headstones and gnarled trees that cast long, skeletal shadows in the moonlight. The further they walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very air were pressing down on them. "You sure you want to do this?" Tyler asked, his voice quieter now. Ethan nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "It's just a cemetery," he repeated, more to himself than to Tyler. They continued deeper into the cemetery, past rows of graves that seemed to stretch on forever. The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead and sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. But still, there was nothing out of the ordinary, just an old graveyard filled with the dead. Nothing more. Finally, they reached the heart of the cemetery, where the tombstones grew larger, the names of the dead faded and worn with age. Here, in the center, stood a massive mausoleum, its stone walls blackened with time and moss. This was the resting place of the town's founding families, or so the legend went. It was said that the spirits of those buried here were the ones responsible for the curse. Ethan stepped forward, his flashlight beam flickering as it swept across the entrance to the mausoleum. The heavy stone door was slightly ajar, just wide enough for someone to slip through. He glanced back at Tyler, who had gone pale. "This is where they say it happens," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The disappearances. They say the spirits come from here." Ethan smirked. "Spirits, huh?" Before Tyler could respond, Ethan walked up to the mausoleum's door. "Let's see if the legends are true." He knocked on the cold stone, his knuckles echoing through the empty night. "Is anybody there?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, from within the mausoleum, came a sound, a whisper. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He turned to Tyler, who had taken a few steps back, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with fear. Tyler nodded, backing away further. "We should go. Now." But Ethan wasn't ready to give up. It had to be the wind, or maybe an animal inside the mausoleum. Ghosts weren't real, and he was determined to prove it. He stepped closer to the mausoleum's entrance, shining his flashlight inside. That's when he saw it, a figure standing in the darkness, just beyond the reach of his light. It was tall, its features obscured by shadow, but there was no mistaking its presence. It was watching him. Ethan stumbled back, his heart racing as the figure began to move, slowly stepping toward the light. Its face came into view, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through him. The figure's mouth twisted into a grin, revealing sharp, blackened teeth. Ethan turned to run, but as he did, the ground beneath him shifted. He stumbled, falling to the earth as cold, bony hands reached up from the soil, grasping at his ankles. He kicked and struggled, but more hands appeared, pulling him down into the dirt. "Tyler!" he screamed, but Tyler was already gone, his footsteps fading into the distance. The hands tightened their grip, dragging Ethan deeper into the earth as the figure from the mausoleum loomed over him, its hollow eyes gleaming with malice. Ethan clawed at the ground, his fingers sinking into the cold, wet soil. He could feel himself being pulled deeper, his body sinking into the earth as the darkness closed in around him. His screams echoed through the cemetery, but there was no one left to hear them. The next morning, the townspeople of Black Hollow awoke to find the gates of the cemetery wide open, a trail of disturbed earth leading deep into its heart. But of Ethan, there was no sign, just another name added to the list of those who had vanished on Halloween night. The town carried on, as it always had, the legend of the Black Hollow curse growing with each passing year. Some said that the spirits had claimed Ethan, just as they had claimed so many before him. Others whispered that his voice could still be heard on quiet, foggy nights, calling out from beneath the ground, begging for release. But no one ever dared to return to the cemetery to find out. And every Halloween, the fog around Black Hollow Cemetery grew a little thicker, as if the dead were waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close.